What's going on, guys? Boy, am I excited to bring you this Despia list. Woo-wee! I like to call this list the Kashtira killer. I think ever since I put this list together, I don't think I've lost a Kashtira at all. Maybe once, maybe. But this list overall has been absolutely phenomenal. The only times I actually lose games is literally just because of bricking. Like every once in a while I'll brick but other than that, anytime I have playable hands, I'm almost always been able to play through stuff. So it's kind of wild. I also get a little bit lucky here and there too, because sometimes I just play around the correct thing. Sometimes I'm okay, this hand has to play through nib, but I'm just gonna play through it or whatever. So stuff like that. I've gone undefeated so far. I caught a few of my locals, and not that that's any kind of crazy feat or anything like that. But I think considering we have quite a few Kash players, I think that's a pretty good indication that this deck is pretty well tested. So I really wanted to bring you guys this list. Heads up, I'm not going to be doing the branded expulsion stuff because I'm just not a huge fan of it, especially not at the local level. I'm not a huge fan of those kind of floodgate type of things, especially the one-way type floodgates. Maybe an actual bigger event, I'll probably actually be playing that version of it just because it just wins just on its own with just literally just branded expulsion. And so you kind of just, if you're trying to actually win-win, yeah, you probably should be playing that list. For me, not the best way that I like to play the deck personally. I like to actually interact with my opponent, have a little bit of fun, etc. So I won't go too deep into it as far as the explanation goes. I do want to explain a lot of the card choices. I think the deck itself is pretty well figured out as far as main ratios. But I want to kind of go over some of my differing ideas and stuff like that, and kind of how it interacts with the extra deck and the side deck, because I think it does play a lot differently than it used to, especially because there's so many different lines you can go through, and the deck is not as linear as it used to be, or if even at all. There's always so many different things that you can try and things that you can do, so it's kind of wild. But let's go ahead and jump on into it. So first off, for the main deck, the only Despias I'm playing are 3 Alubers, 1 Tragedy. I used to really like 2 Tragedy because I like to recycle a lot of my branded spells and traps off of it. That just means I have to play more cautiously with this one and actually be careful and only use the search effect only when I absolutely need to, because otherwise I can just banish it to get the other effect to set a branded spell or trap. Helps me play through other things. Honestly, a lot of the time when you're dumping this, you're not actually going to use the effect to search for the Aluber anyway, unless you just want follow-up or you just absolutely don't have it in hand already. 3 Alubers is obvious. Next up, for the Albaz cards, we have obviously the 2 Albaz necessary. You could play 3. I'm not opposed to 3. I don't feel like it's necessary, and I don't want to brick on it too much. I do like 2, but I might eventually bump it up to 3, especially just to make sure they don't all get banished. Because sometimes even if they banish one face down, it could still be a problem trying to recycle this one constantly, especially when you're trying to use it to break boards and stuff like that. Next up is the Cartesia, absolutely mandatory. You could play 2 if you want. Same idea with the Albaz. Don't want to brick on it too much. Plus, we actually do run the fusion deployments in this deck. Next up is 2 Mercuriers. You have to play 2. You're usually going through 1 in your opening hand. If not, then it's just really good to be able to banish for searching. The 1 Albion, this card's absolutely insane. Lets you basically search for any branded spell or trap, and it's gotten me out of so many sticky situations. Plus the extra draw sometimes just gets you deeper into your side deck, and it's just crazy. So all this stuff is pretty standard, I'd say. You could, like I said, you could run a couple additional buffers. This deck is at 42, so there are a couple cards you could cut or swap out for other for more variations of these cards. Next up are the Bystials. I used to think a bigger Bystial package was better, but I recently cut it down. And I've cut it down to 1 of each aside from Baldrake. I just don't think Baldrake is good, first of all. Second of all, I didn't want to side the Bystials because I felt that it was just kind of a wasted side deck slot. So I wanted to main them in case I wanted to have more gas. Plus also drawing them, plus being able to dump the bird and be able to use them to banish the bird to search Cartesia is always nice. And then Lubellion be able to place is actually really good as well. A lot of decks I've noticed are cutting these 2. You can if you want. I personally just like to have the extra gas for random matchups. Plus these are also Ibli outs. So anytime someone tries to stick an Ibli on my board, I can get rid of it with these, or I have a couple different ways to get rid of it, as you'll probably see. Especially because Ibli is a pretty big problem for this deck. And lastly, we have the 1 Dark Magician. I was really opposed to running the Dark Magician just because it's very bricky. The deck is already bricky as it is. Adding more bricks is just not really what I want to do, but Dragoon is so powerful in this format. Not to mention, it's actually really easy to use this in grave via Albion or Lubellion, or even when it's banished. So you have a lot of different ways of kind of dealing with this as a brick, just as a discard. I don't like running cards solely because they're a good discard, but the power that you get off of this for Dragoon is insane. Honestly, if you really wanted to, you could run one of the Hex Shield fusions instead, because at least that also substitutes for Albaz when it's in the graveyard. Next up, we have the branded spells. Obviously, 3 branded fusion, best card in the game. 3 opening, faster access to a looper. Sometimes you draw too many, but it'd be like that. Also, the protect effect is actually really beneficial this format because of Labyrinth and other cards like that are running around that try to pop your shit all the time. And then we also have the one branded in red. Used to run 2, found it too bricky. Branded in white. This card's absolutely insane. It's like Poly slash Miracle Fusion on steroids. A lot of time I'm using this to bring out Dragoon like out of nowhere. My opponent doesn't see it coming. I like loaded a Dark Magician in there at some point in the game. Have an Albaz engraved. Go branded in white. They're like, okay, sounds good. I make Dragoon and they're like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. And so like it's pretty crazy. Next up we have the continuous spells. We have Branded Regained. This is cuttable. I like it because I like the extra draws. Like I said, it helps you get into your side deck. Also, really good recursion as far as like special summoning back Bystials if you have them in the grave. Because I run 3 of like the ones that you can summon off of this, that's why I kept it. And like I said, the draw is really nice. Overall, sometimes can be bricky, but I like it because if I open one of the continuous spells, obviously I run Lost, then I can just search the other one off Lubellion if I want to. And I tend to kind of like going the Lubellion route just because it helps me kind of load up the graveyard. So this helps me with that. And lastly, I put this along with these because this used to be Branded Beast, but when I cut down the Bystial package, I decided that Beast was no longer all that necessary. And so I run Twin Twisters now because Beast was usually there for like a spell trap pop. So this kind of serves the same purpose. Also, if I absolutely have to, like let's say I open like really bad with like a Bystial and this card, but I also open like Tragedy or something like that, I can like set like some other branded card or whatever, Twin Twister it by discarding the Tragedy and then banish off of like Sarnier or something like that. I haven't had to do that yet, thank God. But it's an option, so that's why I prefer this over like Cyclone. And lastly, for the branded trap, we just have the 1 Retribution. Like I said, I cut the Beast. I haven't been running Banishment. I think if I was gonna cut Regain for something, it would probably be Banishment. Sometimes if you go the Albion into Lubellion route, into the main deck Lubellion route, you don't have a good target for branded in red. So sometimes Banishment would be really nice because just being able to bring back the Albion, maybe fuse away some of their stuff or like one of your things. But I don't, you'll see in the extra deck, I also don't run Stapelia anymore because I just don't think it's all that great this format. And so like also the Banishment's not all that great unless you're playing like the mirror match specifically, which is like kind of like, okay, I guess. But I don't know, we'll have to see what I change moving forward. Next up are the Saucy 2-ofs. I don't really know how to explain this this lineup other than like it just feels right. I haven't done any of the math on it or anything like that, but all this stuff just kind of feels like it's the right ratio. Obviously 1 Burial, 1 Called By because they're at 1. 2 Deployment. Card's insane. Can summon out Albaz going 2nd, Cartesia going 1st. If you did want to run like the Neospatian line, you can run that as you can fusion deploy those out as well. I felt like 2 is kind of the perfect number. I see it just kind of when I want to see it and usually not too much more, which is great. 2 Crossouts. This card is actually crazy in this deck. You'll see why just based on like some of the targets that I run. I've crossed out crazy stuff like Imperms. I've crossed out Branded Fusion. This is really nice, especially in the mirror match, because if they set up Lost and Branded Fusion, obviously your only outside is like normally Ash. However, with Crossout, you can actually cross out Branded Fusion, and since it negates the effect, not the activation, you're still negating it under Lost, which is wild. Next up, we have Talents. Card's actually insane if you get hand trapped. Sometimes helps you play through Ash. If not, you can like rip a card out of your opponent's hand. Going 2nd is absolutely insane for stealing Kashtira cards. Speaking of stealing Kashtira cards, we have Econ. This card has won me way too many games. The main thing you want to focus on when you're playing against Kash is like 1, not getting zone locked, especially not your spells, because if your spells get zone locked, like you lose. And then 2, you want to focus on stealing their macro so that you can start reattaching stuff that has been banished face down so you can use it later. I can't tell you how many times I've had like my Albazes banished or banished face down, and then I end up stealing their macrocosmos, and I just keep on recycling my Albazes that way. So yeah, it's crazy. Plus it gives you an extra body, an extra spot removal. You can use it later when you want to stop banishing your own cards by activating Branded Fusion and then sending Albaz and the macrocosmos, because I mean they'll still go to grave. So it's just crazy. Next up for the hand trap lineup and also quote slash crossout targets, we have double Ash, double Imperm, and then 1 Nib. The ratios are kind of odd. Like I said, I can't really explain it other than it just works. Sometimes you will draw 2 and they're no longer a crossout target. One time I did draw like a stupid hand that was like double Talents, crossout, Called By, and like, I don't know, whatchamacallit, Foolish Burial or something like that, like Regained. I was like, okay, what the hell do I do with this? And then at some point, sometime later in the game, they ended up talenting me, and I couldn't even cross it out because I had both crossouts in my hand, and that really sucks. So every once in a while you get fucked on the ratios, but I think for the most part it's pretty good. I happen to see this whenever I fucking need it. I don't know what it is. This card used to hate me before, and I would always see it as card number 6. But now that I'm running 1, apparently, it just comes to my hand whenever the opponent's summoning more than 5 times for some reason. so it's kind of wild. Imperm's way too good. Also plays around talents and thrust. Ash because you have to, because 1, cross out, 2, because branded fusion. Next up, one of my next favorite parts of the whole deck, the funnest part, the extra deck. You have 2 mirror jades, obviously. You need 2 mirror jades. 2 Albion. Sometimes I wish I had 3, but sometimes it is what it is. This deck is very, very tight on extra deck space right now. So this is kind of all I could afford at the moment as far as extra deck space goes. 1 Sprint, because this plays around contact C. You have to play around it just in case, because if they contact C you and you don't have the out, you're just fucked. 1 Lubellion, because I was playing 2 for a while. I found that there are much bigger threats in this extra deck than Lubellion for them to banish. Plus, even if they banish this, it does suck because it turns off your Dragoon from the going to Dragoon from your main deck. I might alter the extra deck to kind of either play around that or just have 2 of these. But most of the time they're not banishing the Lubellion anyways, just because they're gonna hit the actual Dragoon. Next up we have the Striking Dragon. This card's actually crazy. It outs the Kashtira board for the most part by itself. There are ways they can play around it, but it's really hard for them to out this. And also you can make it like in your mainline play. I'm sure all of you have seen the combo where you dump the bird and the Fallen of Albaz, you banish it off the Bestial, get the Cartesia, you keep on comboing from there, stuff like that. So like it's just a really good combo piece. Plus it's really good as far as like breaking boards, and its graveyard effect is absolutely insane. People forget about it and it wins games just by itself. And I used to run 2, but the reason why is I swapped it for the Dragoon. These are both really big threats to the Kashtira board, so they're probably gonna end up banishing this because it shuts off the Garnet in your deck, and it just takes out 1 big threat against them, because the pop does so much damage. It's a negate. It's really hard for them to play through that. You can do it with just only having 1 body on board, which means that it plays around Big Bang. So like the fact that you can make this is just pretty crazy. And then lastly, we have the Alba Lenatus. This card's actually just really good just because it can recycle all of your banished dragons. Plus it just contact fuses through D-Link. The fact that you can recycle all your dragons is also a really good send off the Mirror Jade if you already have an Albion in the grave, because obviously you don't want to dump a second Albion. You don't really want to dump like a Sprint or anything like that. So you could dump this guy, and he can search you Branded Fusion for follow-up, or he can search you Fusion Deployment, which is kind of cracked. Next up we have obviously the Cartesia Fusion. This card's absolutely insane. The Foolish Burial effect is ridiculous. You can dump so many cards in from this. You can dump, like, I dump Garura sometimes just to get the extra draw. Plus Garura is a super poly target, and you can also use it later in your combo if you go the Branded and White line to make Mirror Jade. So absolutely insane. This card can do so much. Gives you an extra draw. You can dump Albion, the main deck one. That way you can get the branded cards you need in the graveyard. You can dump Sarnier to get the branded cards you need in the graveyard. So wombo combo there. Card is actually crazy. The tag out effect is kind of mid, to be honest. The target that I'm running for it is Quartus, because I was running Proskinian, but I found I never saw myself summoning Proskinian in a scenario where it's like super beneficial. I could almost never get the monster steal, so I just have the disruption, because if they try to out this, first of all, they're gonna have a hard time because it makes everything 0. And then second of all, summons Albaz even if they do, so that means they get a free super poly, or they have to have like, they have to specifically set up their board to like negate it. Now they're trying to play through extra stuff and it makes it a pain in the ass for them. Next up is Guardian Chimera, absolute must. Also, a lot of time Kashtira is banishing this guy too, which kind of sucks, but it's like, you know, it's not that big a deal. I'd rather them banish him than like Dragoon or Rinbrum, so that's fine with me. Next up is Masquerade. He's probably the most cuttable. Really good in time, especially if you're going into game 3 with not that much time left. One time I played against Labyrinth. Just literally went Branded Fusion straight into him. Well, I mean, obviously I went like the Lubellion route and then into him. But what do you call it? I summoned him because against Labyrinth, they can't OTK you on their first turn. So I'm just gonna put him on the board, plays around Lava Golem, just Masquerade pass. They have to set a few cards, and then after they try to activate stuff, they burn. And I just keep on playing it out until either time runs out or until I can get to battle phase after burning through all their interruptions. So overall, pretty good. And lastly is Starving Venom. This card's just absolutely insane. Super poly target. Not to mention this outs towers. One time somebody summoned a Psychic End on me that had like 8k attack or something like that. I couldn't ram it with anything because the minute I would go into battle phase, it would have like 15k attack or something like that. So I couldn't like ram Mirror Jade into it just to out it. I would just literally lose. So I had to make Starving Venom, add the attack, and then I use his effect to copy the Psychic End Punisher because it doesn't affect the card itself. So he can still copy the effects. And then during the battle phase, he also gains the attack, and he was already bigger than the guy, so he just beat over it. Last up is the side deck. This is highly variable to what you're playing against in locals. I try to tailor it just for like the best fit in general against like most decks. It seems to be pretty good. There's a few cards that are kind of hit or miss right now that I'm still trying to test with and see how I feel about. It's probably the most interchangeable part of the whole build, but this is what I've been running. This is what I like so far. I'm running 3 Contact C. I used to have 3 Nib here instead, and then I swapped my ratios from the main deck. As you can probably see, they're kind of some weird like crackhead ratios of like 2 Ash, 1 Nib, etc. So I wanted to make sure I had enough Ashes and Nibs like available for cross out. So like I have the Contact C's here because I think this card is better against Kashtira, because the main thing that you're scared about against Kashtira is them Ibly locking you, or obviously them locking out 5 zones. If you Contact C them, it's like basically impossible for them to do one if not both of those unless they're running like Link 2s, which like most of them aren't. Next up we have the 3 Thrust. This card's cracked. This card is basically almost anything, any good card in your deck. Branded Fusion, Talents, Fusion Deployment, you name it. It's pretty crazy, so I think this card's absolutely insane. It's always live against Kashtira because during their standby phase. Next up, this used to be 3 Twin Twisters. Now I added 1 Cosmic because we have 1 Twin Twister in the main. Twin Twister I think is better because you don't really care about the discard. And I wanted quick effect spot removal because anti-spell Fragrance is just way too good against this deck. Next up is 2 Super Poly and an Evenly. Evenly is honestly mostly here because you can 1 thrust it out, 2 because it's a cross out target in case they try to evenly you. Super Poly is just really good. Honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe cutting like 1 of these for like a D barrier. I got really tired of getting D barriered. I want to have a D barrier target in this deck. I don't really want to take out the Cosmic because I really want as much back removal as possible. That's not that's a quick effect back removal. So I really want to. I kind of like that ratio. So maybe 1 of these I could swap out. Maybe even like the Evenly for a D barrier because I don't see Evenly as much recently. And lastly, the 3 Solemn Judgments. Cards 2 cracked. Solemn Evenly, Solemn a Summon, Solemn whatever you want. Solemn something that's gonna try to like fuck up your board, like Lightning Storm or whatever. Maybe I could cut 1 of these for like a D barrier, but 2 Judgment feels weird. Not to mention a lot of these side cards you can draw into just because you can draw like 2 to 3 times per turn, assuming you get like a cracked hand. And I can't tell you how many times I've drawn into Solemns, drawn into hand traps, stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The deck is pretty cracked. There's a lot of different lines you can do here. Like I said, there's a lot of different options you can do just based on what hand you open. And I think this deck is really powerful, and I think it's better than Kash 100%, especially with depending what kind of hand traps and stuff you set up for it. Have fun with the deck, guys. I think it's phenomenal. I've had a phenomenal time with the deck already, and I can't wait to see what else it can do.